Hello, everyone, and welcome to Land of the
Bowl.
Free
Tree.
Today we're talking about
We
bowls.
can't say Land of the Free, it's copyrighted.
Fuck. Sorry, guys.
America.
Also, this is actually episode 7. But
Yeah.
I fucked up. So.
But we're gonna...
Yeah, well, it's fine.
It's fine.
This is where you go to get unvampired.
Oh, that's actually good to know.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
I would know because I, in my real character, get myself turned into a vampire constantly. Because I suck
Eric
at
likes
this game.
getting bit in the neck. You heard it here first, folks.
I like getting bit, I like biting, you know?
Yeah,
the whole shebang.
The whole shebang.
Oh, shabol.
Shabol.
Ooh, go.
She bowls.
Horse?
She bowls.
Elk.
No, she bowls. She bowls.
Oh my god. Anyways, what are we talking about today,
She
guys?
looks like a bowl and she... we are told... I don't know. You should do this one.
Indigenous rights, but also bowls.
Also
yeah.
bowls. Eric's
Well,
obsessed
I mean,
with
this is a very serious topic, but what would this channel be if not approaching serious topics with just
Too much
totally
levity.
inappropriate levels?
With the
of,
levity of privilege.
yeah.
Ooh, I can mine.
Yeah. I mean, well, we just want to have a kind of loose discussion about the role of indigenous peoples in fighting climate change, and the way that they and their rights can be incorporated into a climate justice framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all.
Do you want to start us
That's all I
off?
had.
Considering you're the expert on this.
I'm the expert. I'll have you know I have a bachelor's degree in something vaguely related to this.
Well,
He did his thesis kind of on this.
I did do my thesis on this.
well, then what do you call it then? Of the three of us.
Okay, fine then. So, basically, it's difficult to really give a strong overview of this because it kind of gets in the question of what is indigenous, and that's a very thorny issue. But in a very loose and non-academic sense, you kind of know it when you see it, or people know it when they're able to define it for themselves and make a valid claim to. What did you just do?
I just found a book and now we can pickpocket better. That's dope.
Oh, cool.
I don't know where the
Beautiful.
fuck
I love
we
thievery.
are.
There's so many
Pick
butterflies.
Yeah,
you could take
also
them.
this is... Wait, I can take butterflies?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
catch the
Oh.
ones.
You catch
cool.
them and
Oh,
put
wait.
them in potions and
Am I
stuff.
killing them?
I mean-
Probably.
Yes.
You ever seen an airplane without its wings? Butterflies, same deal. Yeah. Anyway, so indigenous peoples often have very strong connections to the territory that they've occupied ancestrally and that they continue to occupy. I mean, when people have a really long-standing and ancient connection to a certain land or a certain environment, when they've been living off that land for hundreds or in some cases thousands of years, it means they have a very strong system of knowledge about that land, and that's traditional indigenous knowledge. It's important to start with that because it's distinct from, but also sometimes complementary to, what we in a Western colonial society would think of as knowledge, which is knowledge derived from the scientific method and experimentation. Indigenous knowledge isn't derived in that way, which is why in the past and still to some extent today it's been derided as kind of an illegitimate form of knowing, or as something less sophisticated than formal Western science. But indigenous knowledge is something that's passed down through generations through systems of oral or written storytelling and religious practices, hunting practices, agricultural practices. And so there's a very robust system of knowledge in the world that is not necessarily written down systematically, that's held with only a few people, and the entire basis of this knowledge is that it exists in the minds and in the collective culture of a group of people who live in an ecosystem. And so some of these people are really a lot of the best ecologists in the world, but they're just not published in scientific journals. And that's starting to change. There is a movement among ecological scientists to work with indigenous peoples more, and the more progressive end of this. But right now, as it stands, the important thing to know from a climate and environmental perspective is that indigenous peoples and similar local communities who've lived in forests or other ecosystems for generations and have depended on this land and developed a sacred connection to these landscapes are usually best placed to protect those landscapes. the second thing that's important is that, and this is a little more obvious, but trees are really good for the planet. Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, it's really overlooked in climate circles, in a lot of the mainstream discussions. People talk about like renewable energy, electrifying transportation, making our diet less animal heavy, and those are all valid and absolutely necessary steps to take to preserve the climate. But the fact is that a huge portion of what needs to be done to actually secure a stable future and a stable climate is to protect existing ecosystems, especially forests and peatlands that sequester a lot of carbon and that serve as regulators of the entire global climatic system. Yeah, just as an example of something really scary is that scientists, or at least Western scientists, are now starting to realize that the Amazon not only serves as a major carbon sink and as a home for some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet and many, many different species, but it also serves as a climate regulator for all of South America. So trees, through photosynthesis, they produce transpiration, which is waste to them. They expel water vapor as a part of the photosynthetic process, and when you have that many trees gathered together in one place, it produces so much water vapor that actually changes the weather. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Amazon is a rainforest because it is a rainforest. It's a self-perpetuating ecosystem that's been in balance for thousands of years. The people who are indigenous to the Amazon have kept it in balance. But right now, a lot of scientists are starting to say that the Amazon is approaching the level at which that process will no longer happen. It's at about 17 or 18% deforestation right now, total, not annual. That would be very terrifying, but yeah.
Wait, hold on, 17, 18% total? That's fucking crazy.
So yeah, about 18% of the historical Amazon is gone, replaced with cities and cow pastures and soy farms and what have you. Mines, dams.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, and some of the most decorated biologists in the world are saying that if it gets to 20 to 25%, which it's on track to do that in a few years, then that whole system of climatic self-regulation will be completely upended. So it's going to cause, even if we stopped deforesting the Amazon at that point, we'd have already set off a chain reaction that would lead to the destruction of a large part of the Amazon. Some of it, like really close to the Andes in Peru and Ecuador, might be okay, but a lot of it would disappear naturally as a result of this. And that's like something that happens to climate systems all over the world, you know. The question that we're asking ourselves now in every ecosystem is, how far can we push this shit before we break it irrevocably, and no matter what we do, it's still fucked.
Not that anyone is searching for ways to push it farther. Well, some people are.
Lots of people are.
Not that environmentalists are.
No.
But those are important.
The reason this relates to indigenous peoples is that the best way that you can stop a forest from being cut down is to let local people decide who gets to go in or out of their forest and manage that landscape. All of the available evidence we have shows that landscapes that are owned and managed by indigenous communities in tropical forests and other ecosystems around the world are less degraded than pretty much any other land management regime, even national parks and wilderness preserves, especially like in the global south where governments don't really have a very strong capacity to police deforestation, and when they do, it often turns into just shooting random people. Which we talked about in the last episode.
World Wildlife Fund.
Yep. But really, indigenous peoples are positioned to be the guardians of rainforests and other ecosystems because they have a huge stake in it. For people who've depended on this land for as long as their ancestors could even remember, it really is everything that they're able to preserve this landscape. And because of this extremely strong and deep body of traditional knowledge that these peoples possess, they know how to do it. And so it's been a big learning process, I think, for the environmental movement to come to actually trust these people, to understand that they can manage these landscapes on their own. And it's one thing that I actually think, like, one of the few good news stories in the environmental space recently is that pretty much everyone who has any interest in preserving forests is starting to unite around this goal of helping indigenous and local communities support their own landscapes and gain rights over their own land. It's important to mention here that we shouldn't only support indigenous land rights because they help mitigate climate change, although that's a totally valid and necessary reason to support them. And there are other indigenous rights issues to think about, right? There's things that aren't strictly environmental, like intercultural education, language rights, healthcare, indigenous women's rights, which is a huge issue, especially in the U.S. and Canada. We've been seeing with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's campaign. And y'all can talk more about that soon, but yeah, it is important to remember that indigenous rights have always mattered. The violation of indigenous rights is the entire basis of the current economic system we have that is causing climate change. And if we're able to come to some kind of reconciliation and to restore some of those rights and to restore indigenous authority over their traditional lands, that will be a major step in mitigating climate change. I would say preserving the rainforest is as important as adopting renewable energy on a global scale for tackling climate change, and this is really the best way to do it, according to most of the evidence that exists in the world. So these are people, these are valid and incredibly rich and diverse cultures who have always mattered, but the fact that they have come to play such an immense role as the linchpin of a sustainable future gives this issue extra urgency, and that's why we're talking about it. I just talked for like 10 minutes, so y'all go off.
You have a beautiful voice, and I like to listen to it.
Thanks.
Also, you can speak to it as much better than either of us can. But, you want to go? Is something to say?
No, all right.
Okay, good. Well, here we are. We're just talking. I think the point that Eric made is really important. That there's, yes, it's important for environmentalism purposes to support indigenous people. Also, it's just the right thing to do. If you live in a country that is based off of settler colonialism and genocide of indigenous people, which is every country in the Western Hemisphere, most of the countries in the Eastern Hemisphere,
a lot of countries in the global South.
Yeah, pretty much every country has some.
Also Sweden.
Also Sweden.
Yeah.
Also, let's just say every country. Like every country has some sort of indigenous people that has been.
I think I can oblige.
Welcome to
brutalized
the
under,
friend.
The state,
Capital,
the state. It's as a person of conscience, it's your duty to support people
Remember
who
the
have
winking
been
skeever next time your foot's sore.
put under the boot of these really evil empires all over the world. And there are some countries that are much more prominent examples of that. Shout out to the United States. But I don't know. I've every tiny country in the world, except for I don't know. Me and Eric were talking about this recently. Like Iceland is maybe the only example I can think of.
Yeah, I mean there are a few. There are a few countries where the people who are, for all intents and purposes, indigenous to that land have been given control of the land, and in places like that, there's a lot to learn about sustainability from countries like Iceland, where people are allowed to actually make their own visions of their land a reality.
Yeah, and it's important to note that these places aren't left alone, quote unquote, from the goodness of the rest of the world's heart. It's because it's the worst land. I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of Iceland, you can't grow anything there. There's no real resources to take advantage of.
And it's also very isolated.
It's very isolated. It's very, until the 40s, 50s, it was very poor.
They have giant-ass horses. They're terrifying. I mean, they're very friendly,
they're
but
smaller than most
scary.
horses.
Are they?
Yeah.
Horses are scary, alright, Nick? I'm scared of horses.
No, I'm with you. They're terrifying. They're terrifying. They're so scary.
Oh, cool.
That being said, they're smaller than most horses.
Yeah.
Let me take you down to the stables one day, friend. Let me take you down to the Aqueduct racetrack in Queens, New York. What was I saying? Right, I was getting mad about imperialism.
Yeah.
Protect indigenous rights, because you should.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this I think several times in other broadcasts as well. Environmentalists are super guilty of not respecting indigenous right over the land.
Yep.
Every national park in the United States and the world is stolen land.
Yes.
Like, but especially the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, they were explicitly built to take the land from Native Americans and then essentially ethnically cleanse them for the use of like genteel white men.
There's nothing like a good song.
And
to
that's not like
lift the
an
spirit
opinion.
in
That's
troubled
in the
times.
stated charter of
Yeah.
when they created the parks.
Yeah, there's one exception though, which is that Shenandoah was stolen from white people,
But
whose ancestors
who
probably
first
stole
stole
that
the
land
land.
from Native Americans like hundreds of years earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's stolen from someone is the point.
yeah, I mean, land is stolen often.
Speaking of stealing, I'm sorry, I'm stealing everything.
Yeah, way to prove
Well-
us right.
Why don't you just colonize this store?
Yeah.
Listen,
You should go to Markarth. There's a cool Indigenous rights movement going on there.
Oh yeah, we could have. I mean, if we'd planned this properly, in accordance with our original channel plan, we could have done quests that are pertinent to things we're talking about. We could be doing the Markarth quest right now, but like,
Yeah.
all right.
we
Well,
didn't.
Susie, go to Markarth.
Yeah, go back to Markarth.
right now, I'm
No,
in solitude,
You're
and
robbing this house blind.
Yeah.
first of all, it's a business, so fuck capitalism.
You heard it here first.
Susie like pretends that she's so sensible and just like a normal Democrat, but then
Oh my!
you get her into
okay. I'm not a Democrat.
you get her into Skyrim and she's like, I'm coming for that toothbrush
Yeah,
libs.
Susie's actually just a Republican. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I am a freaking independent. Not that I'm
Oh, yeah.
just. Oh, boy. Okay. Anyways,
The winking skeever.
That's such a creepy. Skeever just sounds like
skeevy. It
Yeah.
sounds like
Skeever sounds like a slur.
it is skeevy, I guess. Rita Skeever from
Rita Skeever.
Harry Potter.
It's
It's not her name. I
Yeah,
know.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm
Also-
riffing on this series that ended like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a great series.
Because everyone loves it.
It's good, but
Yeah.
she just keeps saying things.
Yeah.
Oh,
J.K.
J.K.
Rowling,
Rowling, not
stop
Rita Skeeter.
ruining your own books.
Yeah.
Shout out from
Mhm.
our channel.
Yeah. And this is not a thing about how J.K. Rowling doesn't like Jeremy Corbyn. And that's not why I don't like her. She just doesn't need to say these things about wizards shitting themselves.
Yeah.
It's very
How
unnecessary.
Dumbledore eats ass.
I think
Yeah.
there are funnier ways of doing that too. Like, I think she should have just straight up said Dumbledore eats ass, which she didn't. She
Yeah.
just like suggested it, like, haha. Like, you know what? Get over your British sensibilities. Tell us how he goes down on Grindelwald or whatever.
Grindelwald.
I don't care. I didn't watch
Yeah.
the new movie.
Grundle.
Yeah, but, like-
you.
Dumbledore eats Nazi ass is not exactly a
Well, you know,
feeling.
it's her books. I guess
Yeah.
she can want whatever.
Yeah, Dumbledore, much like Neville Chamberlain, ate Nazi ass in the 40s.
I wish only the president could deal with the Legion.
Apparently, according
My
to Mad Men,
brothers
the story
will lead
goes
our
that he
troops
really
to
needed a
victory.
smoke, and that's why he gave him Czechoslovakia.
No, that
I don't
was
believe
a lie,
that.
Nick.
Yeah, that was
bullshit.
Definitely
Oh,
bullshit.
I want to
A
believe
show.
that. I want to believe that. Also, Czechoslovakia, stolen from the Czechoslovaks in the 40s.
You know that there are two different
Yeah, I know. It's a
ethnicity-
big
There's
thing.
Czechs
They broke
and
up. I
Slovaks.
get it. I'm from the area.
But some people don't know that.
Yeah, true.
You gotta be careful here.
Fuck with the
That's
cheese.
true. Stop
Yeah.
stealing cheese if you don't. If it's too heavy for you, Susie.
Just eat.
You have a problem.
All right, hot takes coming from me, and no one agrees with me. But food is just as important as like healing potions in this game.
Yes, but not when it weighs you down to the point where you can't run.
Well, also our carry capacity is shit right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's because we're like a level 4
You
or
gotta get
6 or
stronger.
No. Strong.
Yeah.
Faster.
Train yourself.
Train yourself.
Better, faster, stronger.
That.
Nah, don't kill me.
I'm
No.
stuck behind these barrels.
Stuck behind these bowls. Well, that derailed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can we take
Let's
this
see. I'm
conversation
trying to
next?
think if I have. Okay, well, so this is a little off the topic of environmentalism, but going off what Eric talked about earlier, mentioned missing Indigenous women and children. So, like, obviously, I'm not an expert on this, and I don't know a ton. So, definitely go to other sources for like more information about this. But if you want a good beginner, the Canadian Broadcasting Company does a lot of these really cool podcasts, and because they're in Canada, they do a lot of like long form journalism about Indigenous people and sort of like court cases, criminal cases, just sort of talking about like issues around Indigenous people and like law up there. and they've done some really interesting ones on like missing children and women, especially as it pertains to like the Canadian government's policies of stealing children from their families and sending them off to be adopted by white parents. When kids were sent
Good
to
timing.
when kids were sent to like forced to go to boarding school where they were beaten if they tried to speak their indigenous languages, and basically traumatized for years and years. They have some really interesting stuff, and it's really fucked up. I mean, the U.S. government has done just as bad things with Native American people and reservations and policies that just discriminate against people.
Yeah, I mean, the residential schools were a thing in Canada and the U.S., but only Canada ever apologized and paid reparations for them.
Yeah, that
It's
being...
reparations? Whoa.
I think... Actually, I'm not
no.
certain about that.
That sounds very
They formally apologized,
Yeah.
and they had like a Truth and Reconciliation report about it.
That being said,
Have we ever has America ever apologized for slavery? Is that a thing that ever happened? Like formally? Like, I don't even gotten to the point of even talking about
presidents say that it was wrong.
Okay.
But like, I don't think we ever did something like that.
Wow.
I mean, also like, not to put too fine a point on it, but like, the Canadian government can apologize all it wants.
Oh yeah, it doesn't mean
like,
jack shit. Absolutely not. But,
people are traumatized from the impacts of that.
Yeah, that just means more people know about it.
yeah.
Yeah, you
It's
talk
like-
to people who experience this, and
It's the least you can do.
Yeah.
and that sort of that, especially the forced removal of children from their families, which happen quite often.
Yeah.
This kind of goes back to something we were talking about last week as well. The physical like disconnect of people from their land is the Canadian government and the U.S. government follow these policies which forcibly remove people from their like native and indigenous lands that their families and their cultures have a connection to send them away to get quote unquote recultured in their eyes as was like appropriate to them. Yeah, and that's really fucked up also because I mean think about it, like, you know, even just like your region or something, like where you grew up, like people have very strong associations with that, and then imagine like being ripped away from that and then being forced to go live somewhere else just because like the government deems that it's unacceptable for you to feel that way, you know.
Yeah.
Some basic empathy there.
Yeah, I've actually read stories about Cherokee people who, so the Cherokee were forcibly displaced under President Andrew Jackson from their homeland in the Great Smoky Mountains and marched to Oklahoma. And so today there's an eastern band of Cherokee who still live in the Smoky Mountains who hid from the government, and there's a western band who live in Oklahoma. And I have read stories about people from the western band who have never been to the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina, but who grew up having these strange dreams about this verdant, mountainous, forested landscape and not knowing what it was because all they'd known was the Great Plains in Oklahoma. And then they visit their ancestral homeland and realize this is the place they were dreaming about. And so there's, you know, when a culture develops such a strong connection to a landscape, that can be imprinted and can still remain, like, even when people have been removed from this place, even for generations. So, you know, it's a good thing to remember that even an indigenous person who doesn't live or didn't grow up in their indigenous territory, it doesn't mean that their indigenous identity is gone. You know, it's a very complex thing, and it's really, you know, it depends on a lot of factors, and there's a lot of very interesting conversations going on in the U.S. now about what makes a person Native American because of Elizabeth Warren's DNA test scandal, which I like Elizabeth Warren in a lot of other ways, but that is a problem, and anyone who tells you it's not a problem is just unwilling to self-critique a little bit.
If you're exploiting indigenous cultures or identities in a way that you can't really relate to or don't have like a real legitimate tie to advance a political campaign that's kind of shitty,
or to like advance your career.
To any personal advancement.
Just don't.
You're being racist.
Yeah.
Like that's just racist.
Just don't.
Also, can we? Ooh.
Fulgunthur.
I don't know what this is.
I don't know what this is, and I don't know how to get there. Oh.
There's a door.
But
the door helps.
Um.
Hodor.
Hodor.
Yeah, I watched the 1 hour Game of Thrones recap last night to prepare
guess
for the
we're
new
going in
season.
here.
Now we know. Now you know.
Now I've
You
confessed
didn't
to
even
the world.
prepare this. You watched it after you watched the
Well,
new
I
season.
had some questions, and rather than make you explain things to me,
Well,
we watched
rather than
this.
explain them to you, I just decided to put it on. Don't make this like you had. Don't say this like you've been any agency in this.
yeah.
This is dope. Yeah, don't be shitty and racist and exploit indigenous people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in general. Oh, that's a lot of blood. Oh, that's a very large amount of blood. What the hell?
Drago don't bleed.
Yeah,
That's
true.
human. That's human blood.
Ooh.
Oh, that's fucking.
Yep. Do Dragon not believe?
I don't think so. That's what he said.
Recognize them.
So
Just like
anyways,
us.
the reason, well, I wanted to kind of follow this topic. Ooh. Adventure. Oh. So yeah,
That's the blood.
I wanted to discuss this today kind of along the vein of following or continuing on our thread about like national parks land, particularly as it pertains to the US, I guess, but like other places as well. Oh my god. I'm carrying too much.
Too much fucking cheese.
All right, I'm gonna eat some cheese. And I don't the way we talk about national parks in this country tends to be very dismissive and erasive of the history of national parks as like land that was stolen from. Ooh, interesting, ivory claw. Land that was stolen from indigenous people. And I don't know. I think it's always good to sort of check ourselves and remind ourselves of that kind of legacy and history. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't know, we can talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
it is another complicated issue because like this land really was appropriated from indigenous people to advance a narrative of American domination over an uninhabited wilderness that everyone knew was really inhabited. But at the same time, there are also examples of indigenous communities reappropriating conservation to support their own land claims. So, for example, Bears Ears National Monument was one of the main public lands disputes in the Obama administration era, and a lot of people were pushing Obama to designate this monument, which he did just a few months before he left office. And local people or local white settlers in Utah were very against it. And they persuaded Trump to rescind this almost immediately. But the whole reason this entered into the national conversation in the first place was that a coalition of like outdoorsy groups and conservation groups actually worked with Native American tribes who saw that some of their, or thousands actually, of their historic sacred grave sites were being desecrated and looted because this land had no legal protections. And they were seeking a national monument designation as a way to get some authority saying that this land had historical value to the United States and that it was worth protecting. And there was a similar push, a little more obscure, but some of the Standing Rock protesters were actually pushing for the Standing Rock, or the area where the Standing Rock protest happened, where the pipeline now crosses under the Missouri River, to be designated as a new national monument. And that was seen as sort of a workaround way to protect the land from the pipeline. I don't know enough about this to say that this was something that like all of the protesters supported, but it was definitely a call that was being made.
That's really interesting.
Yep.
I actually didn't know
I
that
did not know
happened.
that either.
So I was sort of tangentially involved in the Bears Ears because I was working on that with an organization at the time, and that was really interesting. I mean, I can't speak to all of the large green orgs, but at least my org was trying to do a lot of work, not just talking about it as like land, for environmentalism, but also the like kind of sacred meaning of it. And it was really cool to like learn a lot, and like we had a lot of testimonials from people who like lived there and stuff talking about why it was important to them, and it was really cool to kind of hear from people about how like meaningful and important Bears Ears was to them.
Yeah, like when conservation is done in full collaboration with, and when it's driven by indigenous communities who have the biggest stake in what happens to this land, it's a really effective way to save it from being drilled for oil, which is what's happening in Bears Ears now.
Yeah.
So
Because of the Trump administration and everything that stands for.
True.
And again, I think we should also highlight that this isn't something that just happens in the U.S. boy, there's a lot of them. This is, I mean, obviously, like, it's like, especially pertinent to us to call out what's going on in the U.S. because I live here. But
Not anymore.
by no means does that, like, absolve, or should we ignore that, like, European governments have done this. I mean, almost every Western government has been involved in going abroad and doing this to other people as well.
Yeah.
But the U.S. is this, like, not... It is especially horrific how cruel... I mean, think about Mount Rushmore. Like Mount Rushmore is not only... Like, and Mount Rushmore is the symbol of the United States. One of the 3 maybe most identifiable symbols of the United States. And that is literally carved into us, like... The Black Hills are sacred to...
Yeah.
I am so sorry that I do not know actually who the people that live there.
Lakota.
But that's like a sacred site to them, and that's such a calculated and like evil thing to do, is to carve the faces of the literal conquerors of this land into the face of this mountain. And like other countries do it, yeah, but the entire ethos of the United States, like not even going abroad is one thing, but the entire like foundation of this country and Canada, but you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about Canada, unfortunately.
I mean,
How much do you need to know about Canada?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yep. Remember
Justin
what?
Trudeau's overrated.
Remember what the U.S. did as like so-called restitution for the Mount Rushmore thing?
I do not actually.
They are currently in the process of carving a Crazy Horse monument in another mountain in the Black Hills.
What?
Oh.
They're making Crazy Horse, which is just like so stupid, because you think Crazy Horse would have wanted a mountain to be blown up in honor to him?
Oh, my turn.
Have fun.
Also, I mean, yeah, like talking about manifest destiny and like westward expansion, the idea that like somehow the white men who quote unquote discovered, because they didn't discover, but like, you know, whatever, found their way to the United States and then decided that all of the land that they could walk on was all of a sudden theirs. The arrogance is just astonishing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was destabilizing to an entire, not one culture, like many cultures and an entire like group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I think these are things that you won't necessarily like learn about and are hanging around a lot of like particularly involved environmentalists. I think, like, I don't know, in Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, like when you're talking about hiking and like the national park systems and stuff, they don't like teach about kind of the legacy of the parks and the land that, you know, the U.S. took from indigenous peoples, and they definitely should. But yeah, it's important to talk about. I lost my thought.
Level up now.
Ooh,
That's good.
excite.
Yeah.
I think I've stumbled onto a rather dangerous place.
Probably.
Probably.
We're just gonna fight our way through.
Fine, I guess
Why
we're
not?
doing this.
Oh wait, we had 2 level ups.
Oh shit.
Oh.
What movie increasing?
Destruction all the way.
I see you going for that arch. One-handed. All good stuff.
All good stuff. Let's do it. Dual flurry.
Oh, that's a useful one.
We've actually never decided on a single play style, so this is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
More
guess-
fun when you wing it.
Yeah. We
I
have
think-
never just decided on anything, really.
Yeah.
Individually, we all have very different styles of play.
Yeah.
Nick likes to sneak around and arrow people. I like magic and really strong one-handed swords that I can boop people with. I don't know what Susie does.
Yeah, I use my fire and sparks.
Susie uses her
Sparks.
charm.
Yeah.
I don't steal or murder people.
I really
You
wish there
just
was a
robbed the
non-violent-
store.
Yep. Okay, I really wish there was a non-violent way to play this game. Like, if there was a way to beat it with, like, very few fights, or, I don't know, it'd be fun. Fun
Yeah,
challenge.
but you know, whatever.
You can try to sneak past people, I guess, but it doesn't really work.
You have to just have a really high sneak, I guess.
I mean, for the story, there are certain people who you just have to kill.
Ooh!
The fuck?
That was cool. You can walk on the edge, I guess.
Oh, I think that's a pit of spikes. Oh, go and check.
Dip my toe in.
Save and then fall.
Yeah.
This looks so familiar, but
They
then
all look
again,
the
all
same.
the tunnels start to look the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Complete and total side note, but my D&D campaign used a lot of the soundtrack from this game. So moments come up where like music starts playing, and I'm like, oh
Oh,
yeah,
God.
we've come to a peaceful place in the campaign.
And it's like this.
Yeah. Anyways, I play D&D. I'm cool.
Yeah, she's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. I mean, we're.
Ooh, the
Ooh,
claw.
found it.
The
The
claw.
claw. Daenerys Targaryen's notes.
Ugh.
What if I do this? The claw.
You clawed it.
Ooh.
Pushed it real
Uh-oh.
good.
Oh,
Oh.
motherfuckers.
Wait, I didn't know we had those.
Yeah, I bought the spell because
Oh.
I was tired of not having it.
They're very useful. Hit me!
But
Oh,
you
you're
need
speaking
the
language.
perk that lets you really do it. You know.
Well, next time. Skimmy.
Donkey.
Donkey.
Do you think
Ooh,
the
that sounds
Draugr are
fun.
an indigenous group?
What?
They're ancient Nords. There's lore for this. I mean,
Oh.
are the Nords indigenous to Skyrim?
No, they're not.
Well,
No, they're
not to Markarth.
No, it's hashtag fact that
Oh,
they
yeah.
invaded.
Oh,
They
yeah,
landed
I'm not
north
that.
of Windhelm.
I'm not kept up on this
Yeah.
very well, but yeah. So no, the Draugr are just dead, but they are Nords.
Draugr are dead, but they've been there for a while.
Yeah.
It's also, I mean, that was a joke, but on a serious note, like, I find the politics of, like,
Chest is booby trapped.
how do you know?
I saw it.
Yeah, I saw
No.
it too, actually.
I saw it.
No.
I
Run
saw
away.
it. Nick, run.
No, you're telling me if I unpause, I'm gonna get killed?
Well,
Try
no,
it.
just run.
Oh, okay.
That was a really underwhelming booby trap.
Most of them are, except for the one that fucking drops rocks on
Oh yeah,
you.
those are fun.
Oh, hi, friends.
Hello.
Oh, they do
Bugs.
bleed.
I think they're already dead.
Yeah. I felt like you were saying something.
I was saying something, but
Something
I
with
wasn't
the
entirely
politics?
sure about what point
Oh,
I was
yeah.
trying to make.
I mean, well, then I will say something. So, like, and there are complications because, like, it's not like indigenous people were always static and stuff. Like, people migrated and changed their cultures and interacted with each other before colonization happened. Like, so for example, it's unclear exactly how, like, literally true this is, but it is possible that the Plains Indian culture that's really associated with, like, a lot of what Americans think of when they hear Native American, that like Plains Indian culture we were just talking about with the Black Hills, is younger than Anglo-American culture. Because that entire society depended on horses to be able to rule the plains, and horses did not exist in the Americas until the Spanish brought them. Some of the Spanish horses escaped and bred naturally in the wild, which allowed Native Americans to move from the forest to the plains once they mastered horses. So, like, there are lots of incredible ways that those cultures interacted with and managed their ecosystem, but it was also, like, a migratory, evolving culture.
Right.
And so, like, these are really living cultures in every way. You know, there's nothing static about indigenous, and, like, when we say that they have been there forever, it's because, in a very important sense, they have been living a certain lifestyle of, you know, as a community forever. It is not that they have always been the same or that they have not migrated and changed.
Right.
And so, like, you know, there probably are places where, you know, more than one indigenous tribe could lay valid claim to a land because they had been having competing claims since before colonization.
But that's not.
Speaking
That's
of the
not.
rocks.
That's not our That's not
Yeah.
the U.S. government's decision to like decide on, though. You know.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's so difficult to, like, talk about this as someone who's not indigenous, because there are certain truths to the matter that are not debatable, but there's also a lot of complicated stuff involved with this.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why listening and learning as much as you can is always important for any issue, but especially this one.
And like seriously, again, we're not experts, and
Fuck,
like
I am.
go learn from people. There are a ton of people out there, like indigenous people who are teaching classes, like
Yeah.
like holding seminars, at like protests, activism events, things like this, where you can like go and like hear from people who actually like have a connection to these issues and know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Kind of on that note, or what you were talking about before, and like the transitory nature of culture. This isn't really to the U.S., but I recently saw this post that was like, this is, so it was in this map group that I'm in, because I'm a nerd. And it was basically, it was like a map of sub-Saharan Africa, or actually Africa. And it had like all these like little lines drawn on it. Like borders effectively,
Oh,
but
yeah. I know
creating
what
like,
this is.
Oh, wait, yeah.
creating probably close to 1,000 like individual little like
Yeah.
regions. And it was like, this is what Africa would have looked like if like colonialism didn't come in. Or maybe it was something.
Oh yeah, well some of those maps say like, I mean, first of all, those are like, just the map purely as a thing is like interesting, but the way it's captioned matters, because some of them say like, this is what Africa would look like today if there was no colonialism.
Yes.
Like, that was, you can't fucking know that. That's the whole point.
that's
There are whole
exactly what
potential
it said.
futures that are closed off to us.
And
Side note,
one.
how do we... So sorry to derail completely. How do we feel about the steel battle axe? Are we going to use it ever? Are we going to...
Nah,
looks
I don't like
like
two-handed
Eureka,
weapons.
Shit.
So, yeah, I'd like to address that, because one, the idea that groups. So, okay, basically the idea of this map, I think, was that, like, were it not for colonialism, like, and the modern state of the world, like, states would not exist in Africa in the same way, and everything would be grouped by, like, different nationalities, which is, I guess, kind of what they were saying, like, different tribal distinctions. But one, the idea that things would stay the same for, like, 100 years without any communities migrating or changing is just ridiculous, because a lot of these cultures were historically very nomadic, and wouldn't stay static for 100 years in one place,
or recognize hard borders,
borders. And the other thing is, in like many countries, like there were multiple ethnic groups like living. I mean, again, like countries and borders may not have existed in the same way that we think of them today, but they were kind of coexisting and sharing spaces, and sometimes like governance, and the idea that like they would completely segregate themselves and like create their own little regions just due to ethnic divisions is also absurd. And I saw that recently, and that
you don't know what they do.
That map kind of drove me nuts, and shit like that drives me nuts, because again, I mean, this is just another example, and it's well intentioned, but it's wrong, of people like asserting their Western perspective on like the situation of like indigenous or like historic communities and cultures, and it's not like any better. Don't do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my rant about that map.
Not the whole thing like, yeah, you know, if we just let the Native Americans have everything, we'd still be running around in loincloths. Like, nope, there were people in South America building structures that are so masterfully built that we still can't build it.
The Maya
Tenochtitlan.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
The Maya, by a lot of standards, were the most dominant empire of their time, or like the most like technologically advanced empire of their time.
Yeah.
We're still, struggling to understand the Maya specifically because like we don't know exactly what kind of polity they were, whether they were an empire or more like a confederation of city-states with a lot of trading ties. Really interesting stuff, but yeah, there's a whole spectrum of experiences ranging from, incredibly complex and advanced civilizations like the Inca and Maya, who had some technological achievements that we have not been able to match yet. And then there are also, forested hunter-gatherer people, which is a lifestyle that should be admired, but shouldn't be written off as the only thing that was done without Europeans.
It is not any less civilized. Just as it's wrong to like in today's world to say that like a farmer or like agricultural industrial pursuit is any less civilized than like working in like a technological or government sector.
Yeah.
It's just different ways of life. And I mean, this isn't even isolated to the Americas. You have places like the Indus River Valley,
Yeah.
like Northern Europe, where there were indigenous cultures that were creating like very, very complex technology and societies and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really like Western superiority of like white men who want to say like all those civilizations were backwards.
Yeah, and some of those, some of those were also pretty bad empires. Like a lot of the native peoples in Mexico initially sided with the Spanish because they were tired of being oppressed by the Aztec and taken as human sacrifices. But later this massive colonial system was in place that kind of relegated them all to the same level of marginalization. So it's really hard to define what indigenous identity is, because I'm not even like an anthropologist, let alone an indigenous person, and there are so much of it is defined relative to colonialism, and it's hard to say, like, if we're talking about a hypothetical world without colonialism, we're talking about a world that's completely unlike anything we have known for thousands of years. But there's a less colonial future that we can build, and it involves listening to the people who've gotten the short end of the stick.
And it also involves doing things like, I mean, okay, like really radical, time for me to get really kind of radical, which is sad, and also
buckle up.
Buckle up,
kiddo.
Click it or ticket, motherfuckers.
Also, yeah, like getting some hot takes from me that I don't like necessarily voice. So here we go all the time. But like, kind of, we have to. I'm gonna preface this with the understanding that like a lot of what I'm gonna say is like hypothetical and not possible with our current political and like cultural systems. But anyways, I mean, moving forward, I think we have to like give land back to people. Like that should be a thing that happens, and then also like have to understand that we have to either like pay reparations in the form of like money, or some other way that like in talking to people they say like we deem this an appropriate form of reparations. But really, like, I don't even think we can even begin to talk about like starting the healing process until like, one, there's a lot more education on these issues, and we have resolved the issue in the present as much as we can of like the fact that we as a country stole land from people, and oftentimes like then also like enslaved them, or at best just like shoved them somewhere else and like treated them very, very terribly, and like subjected people to hundreds of years of like cultural and systematic abuse, which by the way they've proven like is something that is passed down genetically as sort of like a biological trauma. And I think that like those things need to be addressed before we can like even start to talk about like a future that isn't impacted by like the colonial legacy of this country.
Yeah, not to bring up Canada yet again, Canada in the conversation, but they basically treated First Nations there pretty similarly to the United States in their early history, but then they underwent a whole truth and reconciliation process, and now Canadians are, true to form, they're very polite to First Nations people, and they say the right things, they acknowledge whose land they're on, but there's still a lot of dissatisfaction among First Nations there and other Indigenous peoples in Canada. Fun fact, Métis and Inuit people are not First Nations. We don't need to get into that now, but
different.
Again, nuances, complexities, many Indigenous identities, but yeah, but if you look at Indigenous Canadians and their material conditions, Canada is ranked 6th in the world in terms of Human Development Index, but if you look at only the HDI scores for the Indigenous communities in Canada, it's 63rd. I heard that in a speech from Perry Bellegarde, who is the chief of the Assembly of First Nations in Canada. Great speaker, awesome person. Haven't met him, but I've seen him. Very cool. Anyway, so, when you have this reconciliation process where you make a lot of rhetorical improvements, but you don't fix the underlying material conditions of colonialism, it's not going to satisfy people, nor should it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. You have it backwards. It's bird, and then something.
Bird.
Bird.
Yeah, I have been here. I just remembered.
Have you?
Yeah, I've been in here sometime. I don't know. There's so many freaking crypts in this game.
There's another place with
It's like
something
fucking
similar.
Paris.
R.I.P.
Jesus.
R.I.P. Paris. Sorry.
Yeah, not something we're trying to make light of.
No.
That's terrible.
I was making a totally unrelated joke about how many catacombs there are in Paris, but yeah.
Creepy as shit.
The loss of Notre Dame is horrifying. Yeah. Very sad.
Also, not related to this really at all, but if you make comments about the the burning of Notre Dame in Paris being an attack by Muslim people on Catholicism, one, you're wrong, and two, you're being fucking racist, and stop
Yeah,
it.
it's just bizarre, because, like, you
It's-
don't know that.
No, it's citing a InfoWars
Jesus.
article, because Alec Jones is a fucking monster.
Love InfoWars.
But it's wrong. It's not true. It was related to construction. Fucking stop it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've been seeing those takes all day. I'm so goddamn sick of
Yeah.
it. Also, stop talking about this as like an example of like how Europe is declining, because also that's
It
bullshit.
was an accident.
Yeah.
That's bullshit and xenophobic.
It was just probably someone, like, smoking in the construction site, or
Also-
a welder, or, I don't know.
Also, that construction company is about to get fucking
Oh,
wrecked.
hell yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I was reading that the two towers weren't impacted, and they were able to save almost all of the artwork that was saved
That's
there.
good. Did they save the windows?
No.
Oh.
Well, maybe some of them, but it's really kind of too bad. Those windows were from like 1200.
Yeah.
Yeah. The loss of cultural heritage matters to any culture. Yeah. And, you know, it sucks whenever it happens to anybody. And that's just, like, a part of the systematic cultural dispossession that's inflicted upon indigenous peoples when when their lands are taken, when their traditional knowledge is undermined by losing access to the landscapes where they served as stewards, and where their artifacts are taken into Europe and North America in
Yes.
museums.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I have a friend who works on art history and like antiquities trafficking. And she
Oh no,
Like-
I'm gonna die.
could
Oh, yeah,
teach
you
us
are.
a lot about how the U.S. has stolen art and artifacts from not just like indigenous cultures, but countries all over the world, but particularly indigenous cultures, and it's really, really, really fucked up.
Yep.
And only just now are European countries starting to, or sorry, Western countries starting to sort of think about the things
Yeah.
that they have stolen and even starting to consider giving them back, which is really fucked up. But yeah, Notre Dame was built before France was even really a country. I mean, the construction started in 1100, so back then it was actually probably the Gauls living there.
Oh no.
Yep. It's really cool that there are things that are that old. As an American, I'm just blown away when I'm in another country and I'm like, yo, this shit's like really old.
I mean, 1100 was before the Dark Ages, you know? That was just
Yeah,
like,
that was people out there taking a break from, I don't know, being serfs in the field to build this dope-ass
beautiful,
cathedral.
beautiful church.
Yeah, I've never been because Europe's not for me, fam. But
I think I've been.
yeah,
I'm going to Paris this year, so I guess I'll get to see it again.
tell us more.
Ah.
Yeah, okay.
Huh.
Sorry.
Listen, Eric, some of us chose to study other places in Latin America.
Okay,
It
Peruvian things
happened.
are older. Take that.
Things are old, and we like to argue about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm fucking terrified.
Yeah,
right
we
now.
might die. We're a level 7.
You're playing well,
so
though.
scared.
You
You
are
like-
playing well.
I'm happy with your performance so far,
Thank you.
Nick. We're
Thanks, guys.
thinking about offering you a promotion to senior live streamer.
Freaking drink the Suma dog.
Oh shit, we're gonna become like drug addicts.
You almost got him. But wow, he really hits you hard.
Yeah, he does. Anyway, to continue whatever you guys are talking about.
Yeah. I don't know. This has gone on for almost an hour.
Yeah, we definitely have veered off topic a little bit. Holy shit!
Yeah, and you know that's because this is one of the most complex and underrated relative to its
Safe.
important issues
Safe.
that there
Safe,
are.
Nick.
Safe. Yeah. Yeah, this is a really important issue that matters in its own right and has huge implications for how we confront climate change as a species. So that's why we're devoting like our longest episode to it. But
And this
yeah.
is something that is going to come up again and again and again. Like, this
Yeah.
isn't something that we can just talk about once.
This could be an entire series, much like a
Could.
lot of the things we talk about.
Yeah. You haven't heard The Last of Us.
Or this topic.
The Last of Us, a game I never played.
Oh, me too. I've heard it's really good though.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that movie.
It's like when it came out, we're like it's the first like art video game.
Yeah, it's one of those video games that people made to prove that video games can be like film.
Oh, that's cool.
It's like a zombie game, but it's pretty good. I've seen some videos
This
of it.
is also.
This is so unrelated to anything.
Yeah. I think this is a pretty decent place to stop the episode, considering I just had the fight of my fucking life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we made a good closing point too.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyways. Well,
Donate to your local pipeline protest. I don't know what the closing.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a major action going on that I was going to
wanted to
mention.
talk about
Yes.
this. Yeah.
There's a group called Extinction Rebellion. It's a climate activist group that's got cells or not cells. That has bad connotations. Yeah,
Branches.
it's got branches all over the world. But they are very strong in the UK, and right now they have a massive civil disobedience campaign going on in London, where they're blocking major intersections and demanding that the government meet its own climate commitments and go beyond to take meaningful action on climate change, even in the midst of the Brexit shit show that's tearing the UK apart.
Shout out Halloween Brexit.
Oh yeah, spooky. I'm gonna hate all the costumes in DC
Oh,
this year.
wow. Yikes.
Yeah, but if they can do it there when they've got so much else to worry about, I think we can do it here. And I think, we can go support actions like this and
Yes.
learn our dragon words.
Yeah, Learn Your Dragon.
Alright.
There's an Extinction Rebellion's presence in the U.S., but they're not very
Yeah, there is.
strong as far as that. I've talked to a
Yep.
couple of them.
I'd love it if they got stronger. Yeah.
Yeah,
Stronger.
there's a lot of things I'd
Yeah.
love to happen.
Yeah,
in the
well,
world.
We really exceeded expectations in our gameplay today.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Anyways,
Call it a day.
learn about or check out the mass extinction protest. See if there's anything going on in your community. If you want to start your own, I'm sure people would be willing to talk to you. Always good to just find out what's going on in your town and get involved.
Yeah, and we'll tweet out some resources on the topics we talked about today, so you don't have to rely on our word vomit.
We actually
About these
will.
things.
I promise.
This
Yeah.
time, everything will happen. Last week was a very bad week for all of
It'll
us.
happen. It's been a really rough month so far.
Yeah.
But it'll be good.
Rough meaning busy. We're okay.
Well, most of us.
Hey.
2 out of 3 of us are fine. Anyways,
What is okay?
Anyways,
tune in next week.
good night, my
Next week.
stars.